Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of The Buzz. I'm Todd Jaden. Sitting next to me is not Kelly Polk, but Don Osterberg, our senior leader within the Safety and Training Department. And today we're going to talk about pending hours of service changes. But before we do that, let me just share with you that last week Kelly and I indicated that we would be at the Memphis Operating Center on Monday of this week. And if you were there, to stop in and say hi. Well, if anyone stopped in looking for us, we were not there. We ran into some travel issues, and certainly the last time we traveled together, we also had issues, so we may not travel together anymore. Bottom line is the airlines messed up our flight going into Detroit, didn't get to Memphis, got rerouted through Chattanooga and ultimately to Birmingham, Alabama. But made it back to Green Bay in time to shoot this week's edition of The Buzz. And we are going to talk about hours of service changes. So before we get into the specifics, Don, a question I have that I've been getting is the July 1st date, is that going to happen? And when it does happen, then explain to us what changes the drivers can look forward to.
Sure. Essentially, the bottom line up front, Todd, I do believe that the new hours of service rule will go into effect on July 1st. Let me just fill in a little bit on that. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration published the final rule in December of 2011, and I'll summarize kind of what those changes are. After that was published, and that is the rule that is scheduled to go into effect on July 1st of this year. But after the rule was finalized, several lawsuits were filed. And the American Trucking Associations, along with the Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association, filed a lawsuit essentially saying we think the changes to the rules went too far. They're too restrictive for commercial trucking, and asked that the rule be remanded back to the agency for reconsideration. Simultaneously, the public safety advocates filed a lawsuit saying we don't think the agency went far enough. They were striving to have the 11th hour of driving eliminated in the restart provision that we've used.
And that tends to be the norm in issues like this, right?
Exactly.
You got two
very polarizing views on that subject. What they did was interesting is they actually lumped those together into a single lawsuit, if you will, or in other words, there's a three-judge panel in the District Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. that's actually hearing this case. And they have done both the written and the oral arguments. And we do expect that they will publish a final rule at some point in time, potentially before July 1st. It's difficult and often risky to speculate, but at this point, based on people who I have talked to who were in the courtroom for the oral arguments, the sense that we get is that the judges are really aligning with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration on this, and that the rule will indeed go into effect on July 1st.
And so that's our plan, folks, is July 1st, these changes that Don will now talk about are going into effect. So, Don, let's talk about what it means to the driver.
And let me just take a step back, Todd, because I think creating a little historical context is helpful. You know, first of all, the fundamental question that's often asked is, well, why are we tinkering? Why is the agency tinkering with the hours of service rules? The mission of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is to reduce truck-involved crashes, high-severity crashes resulting in fatalities or serious injuries. As they look at the causal factors associated with truck-involved crashes, what emerges is that fatigue is indeed a contributing causal factor in many of the high-severity truck-involved crashes. So the view was that they wanted to take a scientific approach to ensure that they published hours of service rules that will afford commercial drivers, let's face it, a safety-sensitive vocation, the opportunity for restorative sleep. So that's kind of a little bit of the foundation upon which they built the rule. Now let's talk a little bit about the new rule. There are really two fundamental areas that are different, and then there's a sub-element of the second one. First of all, drivers will be required to take a 30-minute rest break, 30 minutes off duty within the first 8 hours of work before they can continue to drive. So in essence what that does is it really takes what was a 14-hour workday down to 13 and a half hours. Mm-hmm. It could potentially be less than that depending on the timing of when you take that 30-minute break. But in essence, that's what it does. The other area of change is...
And in reality, most drivers are probably taking that 30-minute respite, maybe not 30 minutes consecutive, but over time, I think it would be fair to say that that's not a dramatic change.
I don't think so. I think most drivers are. And whether or not it's been exactly 30 minutes, there could be, in terms of the felt effect of this, some drivers who may have gotten off the highway to stop and have a bio break or get a cup of coffee or a sandwich. Usually they're taking 30 minutes to do that. But for those that haven't in the past, they'll need to extend that to a full 30-minute break. Mm-hmm. So the felt effect should be somewhat negligible on that 30-minute rest break. The other area that perhaps is going to be more significant is around the restart provision. And essentially, as all of our driver associates know, we have had the opportunity to do what's called a 34-hour restart, or 34 consecutive hours off, would essentially refresh the driver's 70-hour rule. The changes to that essentially are as follows. There is now really a variable restart. It can be as short as 34 hours, or it could potentially be as long as 52 hours, and here's how that works. Drivers will be required to take 2 consecutive nights off duty, defined as 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. So depending on when the break starts, it could be between 34 hours and 52 hours. And the other component of that I think is relevant to our drivers is that they are limited to 1 restart per week, and that's not on a calendar week, but it's really defined by 168 hours. So in other words, from the start, if you were to take a break, a restart break, you have to, whenever you start that, 8 hours later, let me say that again, 168 hours later, you could start another break.
Yeah.
So you can't take multiple restarts during the week. So those are really the most significant
and
changes.
The 2 consecutive 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. breaks really gets after that restorative sleep pattern that you talked about.
Well, it does. And really, when you think about the hours of service rules, the daily limits of essentially 14 hours of work and 11 hours of driving really are designed to make sure that drivers aren't a victim of acute fatigue. The weekly limitation, in this case 70 hours, is really attempting to mitigate the negative effects of what's called cumulative fatigue. And we know that fatigue builds up over time. And what the science tells us and the agency is that if you have 2 nighttime sleep periods off duty, and let's face it, as human beings, we get our best, most restorative sleep at night. And if you take 2 consecutive nights off duty, you really erase any cumulative fatigue that the driver may have accumulated throughout the week. And so they essentially start refreshed having come off of 2 consecutive nights off duty.
So, summary quickly would be 30-minute break that has to be taken in the first 8 hours of on-duty time.
Correct.
Is one major change, and major being a relative term there. And then really the 34-hour restart that is requiring 2 consecutive 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Break periods, and you only get one of those 34-hour restarts in a 168-hour period.
That's correct. And just to highlight, Todd, we're going to try to make this as easy for our drivers as we possibly can. So we are just about completed with a computer-based training module that will be done in mid-May that we will expect all of our driver associates to take, that will really educate you on the details of the changes. The other thing that we're doing to make it easy is that working with Qualcomm, we will now have an additional counter, if you will, that will be tracking the need for that 30-minute break in the first 8 hours of work. So the driver will be able to see when they need to take a break and when, after the break, they will be eligible to continue to drive. And the same for the restart provision. So there will be essentially a counter or a clock, if you will, that will tell them when they're eligible to start their next restart. So we're going to try to leverage the technology to the degree that we can to make this as transparent to our drivers as possible.
So, a couple of things to close here. First of all, for any DBLs that are watching the Buzz, we will have a Leader's Edge topic on the hours of service changes, so you can refer to that to be able to answer questions that drivers may have. If drivers have more specific questions, Don, who's the best person to call internally if they need help in really understanding this?
Well, really, anyone on the regulatory staff is knowledgeable about the hours of service changes. So if they would just call as they normally would into our regulatory department, they'll get someone who will be knowledgeable and can help coach them through any questions that they might have.
Okay, very good. Anything else we should know about hours of service changes?
You know, Todd, if I could just close, is to say, let's face it, we're transportation professionals. And as a result of that, we do have an obligation to operate as safely as we can. As always, we are a compliant company. We embrace the science behind the change. We think that the changes to the hours of service rule, while unpopular with some folks, are science-based, they're reasonable, there's some that we can and should live with, and I think it's a measure of our commitment to improving public safety and reducing those fatigue-related crashes. So I look at this as a good thing for the industry. I know that's perhaps a minority opinion, but again, anchoring on the obligation that we have to operate safely, I think this is a step in the right direction.
Well, Don, let me close with this. We are one of the safest carriers in the industry for a number of reasons. The two primary ones, in my opinion, are our driver group because of their professionalism and how they perform, and the leadership that you provide to this organization and the rest of your team. We've got the best internal team in the industry. So thanks for sharing time with us this week. We certainly appreciate it.
Very kind. Thank you, Todd.
All right. Take care. Thanks and drive safe.